إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
So we're going to read all the way to 10 and everything, right? 28.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم رب شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام، صل على محمد وآل محمد وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عامي هذا وفي كل عام، واغفر لي تلك الذنوب العظام فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا رحمن يا علام.
اللهم صل على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، ويقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، واجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي، فكم يا إلهي قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، كبره تكبيرا. الله أكبر. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره، وحمده الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يده، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيد كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما، إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير، مع حاجة بي إليه عظيما، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي، أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وأريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، ودلنا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك، فإن أبطأ عني عتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي يبطأ عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلما مولا كريما أصبر على عبدك عليه يا رب، إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي وأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن اليد تطول عليك، ولم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي، والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك، فارحم عبدك الجاهل، وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك، مجري الفلك، مسخر الرياح، فالق الإصباح، بيان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق، باسط الرزق، خالق الإصباح ذي الجلال والإكرام، والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى، وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعارضه، قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، وبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أناديه، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه، فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مونقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا واذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه، ولا يغلق بابه، ولا يرد سائله، ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين، وينجي الصالحين، ويرفع المستضعفين، ويضع المستكبرين، ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين، مبير الظالمين، مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين، طريق المستصرخين، واضع حاجات الطالبين، معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها، وترجف الأرض وعمارها، وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا، وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق، ويرزق ولا يرزق، ويطعم ولا يطعم، ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى، وهو حي لا يموت، بيده الخير، وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك، وخيرتك من خلقك، وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك، أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى، واكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين، ووصي رسول رب العالمين، عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك، وحجتك على خلقك، وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي. حجتك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعبد المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك. استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله. مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له. أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم عزه وعزز به وانصره وانتصر به وانصره نصرا عزيزا وافتح له فتحا يسيرا واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملناه وما قصرنا عنه فبلغناه. اللهم المم به شعثنا واشعب به صدعنا وارزق به فتقنا وكثر به قلتنا وعزز به ذلتنا وأغن به عائلنا واقض به عن مغرمنا واجبر به فقرنا وسد به خلتنا ويسر به عسرنا وبيض به وجوهنا وفك به أسرنا وأنجح به طلبتنا وأنجز به مواعيدنا واستجب به دعوتنا واعطنا به سؤلنا وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمال واعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وقلة عددنا وشدة الفتن بنا وتظاهر الزمان علينا. وصل على محمد وآله وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله وبضر تكشفه ونصر تعزه وسلطان حق تظهره ورحمة منك تجللناها وعافية منك تلبسناها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم برحمتك في الصالحين فأدخلنا وفي عليين فارفعنا وبكأس من معين من عين سلسبيل فاسقنا ومن الحور العين برحمتك فزوجنا ومن الولدان المخلدين كأنهم لؤلؤ مكنون فأختنا ومن ثمار الجنة ولحوم الطير فأطعمنا ومن ثياب السندس والحرير والاستبرق فألبسنا وليلة القدر وحج بيتك الحرام وقتلا في سبيلك فوفق لنا وصالح الدعاء والمسألة فاستجب لنا وإذا جمعت الأولين والآخرين يوم القيامة فارحمنا، وبراءة من النار فاكتب لنا، وفي جهنم فلا تغلنا، وفي عذابك وهوانك فلا تبتلنا، ومن الزقوم والضريع فلا تطعمنا، ومع الشياطين فلا تجعلنا، وفي النار على وجوهنا فلا تكبنا، ومن ثياب النار وسرابيل القطران فلا تلبسنا، من كل سوء يا لا إله إلا أنت، بحق لا إله إلا أنت فنجنا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك أن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في الأمر الحكيم، من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل، أن تكتبني من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم، المشكور سعيهم، المغفور ذنوبهم، المكفر عن سيئاتهم، وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية، وتوسع في رزقي، وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به ولا تستبدل بي غيري. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان، أو يطلع الفجر من ليلة هذه ولم تقف لي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إلهي وقف السائلون ببابك، ولاذ الفقراء بجنابك، ووقفت سفينة المساكين على ساحل بحر جودك وكرمك، يرجون الجواز إلى ساحة رحمتك ونعمتك. إلهي إن كنت لا تغفر في هذا الشهر الشريف إلا لمن أخلص لك في صيامه وقيامه، فمن للمذنب المقصر إذا غرق في بحر ذنوبه وآثامه. إلهي إن كنت لا ترحم إلا المطيعين، فمن للعاصين، وإن كنت لا تقبل إلا من العابد، فمن للمقصرين. إلهي ربح الصائم وفاز القائم ونجا المخلصون، ونحن عبيدك المذنبون، فارحمنا برحمتك، واعتقنا من النار بعفوك يا كريم يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إنك قلت في كتابك المنزل: شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. فعظمت حرمة شهر رمضان بما أنزلت فيه من القرآن، وخصصته بليلة القدر، وجعلتها خيرا من 1000 شهر. اللهم وهذه أيام شهر رمضان قد انقضت، ولياليه قد تصرمت، فقد صرت يا إلهي منه إلى ما أنت أعلم به مني، وأحصى لعدده من الخلق أجمعين. فأسألك بما سألك به ملائكتك المقربون وأنبياؤك المرسلون وعبادك الصالحون، أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد، وأن تفك رقبتي من النار، وتدخلني الجنة برحمتك، وأن تتفضل علي بعفوك وكرمك، وتتقبل تقربي وتستجيب دعائي، وتمن علي بالأمن يوم الخوف من كل هول عددته ليوم القيامة. إلهي وأعوذ بوجهك الكريم وبجلالك العظيم أن ينقضي أيام شهر رمضان وليالي ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعاقبني أو خطيئة تريد أن تقتصها مني لم تغفرها لي. سيدي سيدي سيدي، أسألك يا لا إله إلا أنت، إذ لا إله إلا أنت، إن كنت رضيت عني في هذا الشهر فازدد عني رضا، وإن لم تكن رضيت عني فمن الآن فارض عني يا أرحم الراحمين. يا الله يا أحد يا صمد، يا من لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد، يا ملين الحديد لداود عليه السلام، يا كاشف الضر والكرب العظام عن أيوب عليه السلام، أي مفرج هم يعقوب عليه السلام، أي منفس غم يوسف عليه السلام. صل على محمد وآل محمد كما أنت أهله أن تصلي عليهم أجمعين، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بي ما أنا أهله. يا ملين الحديد لداود عليه السلام، يا كاشف الضر والكرب العذاب عن أيوب عليه السلام، أي مفرج هم يعقوب عليه السلام، أي منفس غم يوسف عليه السلام. صل على محمد وآل محمد كما أنت أهله أن تصلي عليهم أجمعين، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بي ما أنا أهله. يا ملين الحديد لداود عليه السلام، يا كاشف الضر والكرب العذاب عن أيوب عليه السلام، أي مفرج هم يعقوب عليه السلام، أي منفس غم يوسف عليه السلام. صل على محمد وآل محمد كما أنت أهله أن تصلي عليهم أجمعين، وافعل بي ما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بي ما أنا أهله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا خازن الليل في الهواء وخازن النور في السماء ومانع السماء أن تقع على الأرض إلا بإذنه وحابسهما أن تزولا، يا عليم يا عظيم يا غفور يا دائم، يا الله يا وارث يا باعث من في القبور، يا الله يا الله يا الله، لك الأسماء الحسنى والأمثال العليا والكبرياء والآلاء. أسألك أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد، وأن تجعل اسمي في هذه الليلة في السعداء، وروحي مع الشهداء، وإحساني في عليين وإساءتي مغفورا، وأن تهب لي يقينا تباشر به قلبي، وإيمانا يذهب الشك عني، وترضيني بما قسمت لي، وآتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار الحريق، وارزقني فيها ذكرك وشكرك والرغبة إليك والإنابة والتوبة والتوفيق لما وفقت له محمدا وآل محمد عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم صل وسلم.
Assalamu alaikum, sisters and brothers. We continue our planned series of talks. Today, the discussion is going to be about advocacy for justice. So we have today this gentleman, his name is Hussein Jafar, he's based in Birmingham. He graduated with optometry from the University of Birmingham. He also completed his Hausa studies at the Al-Mahdi University, Al-Mahdi Institute, and he runs several optic practices all over Birmingham. He volunteers for the citizens of UK, representing Birmingham and UK. So I had an interview with him a couple of weeks ago. So a couple of weeks ago, it was in the morning. especially for us. So please welcome Salawat.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hasnain, Ramadan Mubarak.
Alaikum salam, Jawad uncle. Ramadan Mubarak to you.
Thank you very much for waking up early. I know I woke you up quite early UK time. I really appreciate you making time for us. Hasnain, you and I meet for the first time here on video, but I know your family very well. I know your grandfather, I know your father, I know your aunt. And I know a little bit about you. You've been into optic world. You've also done extensive studies at Islamic houses in the UK, and you've been quite active on the activism scene, right? Advocating for justice in various things. So that my audience gets to know you better. Why don't you just walk us through a little bit of your background, and then we can continue our conversation here.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the business side of things, that's my livelihood. I'm in optics, like you said. But in terms of my justice and advocacy work, I think it's been on a bit of a journey. So I started off within our community, working in interfaith and connecting, doing a lot of community organizing, connecting different institutions to try and make policy changes in the UK. But then I've been on to study more about capitalism and race and imperialism, and I've taken a much more radical turn in my thinking and the work that I do. So now, especially with what's happening in Palestine, this work has become very much an education piece at the moment, but also looking at how we build a new world and how we transition from where we are at the moment into something different.
Well, so we are quite in for a treat today. I think when Ali Reza Khaki, your colleague over there, suggested that I speak to you, I think he picked a good candidate. We are in a broken world. I mean, if you look at the inequity, economic inequity around the world, the have and have-nots, right? I mean, we see extensive homelessness in major cities in the United States, right? We see all this flooding of refugees from the southern parts of the world to the northern parts of the world, looking for prosperity and a peaceful life. And then we see this killing of so many people. I mean, 31,000 plus people have died in Gaza. I mean, it's a broken world. What do you make of it?
It's a broken world. I mean, I think that the way we have always thought about things like this in the past, I was young when Bosnia happened, but we've been through the Iraq war and the Syria, and we always look at these incidents in isolation, and we can always point at the injustice when it comes to, oh, this politician said this and that's really bad, or this person said this. And I think what Palestine is doing for us, and I really believe this, like I say constantly, Palestine is freeing us, because what Palestine has done now is raise, I think, the awareness of people to the extent that now we're beginning to see the connections between all these disparate events and injustices. And I'm really glad you brought this up, both in terms of an international setting and a domestic setting, because these things are very interrelated. So I'd say to you that the question I ask myself when I see everything that's happening in the world is not so much how do we stop this particular injustice from happening, but it's why are all these injustices happening, and what is the root cause of all of it? I think if we can see Palestine as a settler colonial project, now I think that's mainstream. Everyone accepts that this is a settler colonial project. And we can understand that the roots of colonialism come from capitalist exploits, right? Like, then we begin to draw connections that this is a capitalism problem. And this same system, which has justified and allowed and promoted the exploitation of Palestine, has done so in other parts of the world. And this same system that is allowing these international exploits is what's causing our domestic injustice, the inequity in wealth in the UK, in the US, the homelessness, the energy crisis, all of that. And this same system is what is also causing the climate crisis, which we're seeing now is not just an abstract concept, but is actually causing death and suffering in the world around us today. So I think this is the really critical piece that we have to start connecting in our minds, is that this isn't like, oh my God, what's going wrong right now? This is always meant to be how this was always where capitalism was leading us, this system of unending growth and exploitation of natural resources and the global south and the land of people that are outside our country. This was always where it's going to end. So
but I mean,
when I look at,
but let me just pause you there for a second, right? When after the Second World War, right? I mean, after the Holocaust in Germany, and the failure of the League of Nations, right? United Nations came about, and one of the premises of the United Nations was to actually lead us to a safer world. And now we see the United Nations Security Council, the members of the Security Council, are not really willing to pass a resolution to call a ceasefire, and thousands of people are still dying. So, I mean, like, is our organization like United Nations dead?
Organizations like United Nations were never alive. So this is a really interesting point, and your framing is beautiful because the timeline is really important. So I'm going to take you back to the Second World War because it was a really important time. Before the Second World War, these colonial exploits and even racism was a naturally accepted part of the Western world, right? So in the Enlightenment period, there were philosophers and scientists who justified the idea that white people are better than brown people who are better than black people. Like this hierarchy of white supremacy was established in a formal way. In the universities, in the UK, you know, people were doing this work and the philosophers were open about it. Philosophers that even we will have heard of, Kant, Hume, Descartes, you know, these philosophers were open about this. That was a justification that allowed colonial exploitation and racism to happen. But this justification is really important because without justification, the systems lose participation from people, right? If we believed that our governments and these states were acting in unjustified ways, we wouldn't want to be part of that anymore. We would rebel, we would rise up, right? So justification has always been a really important part of what the system does. Now, the Second World War was a really key turning point because Hitler used the same science, the same philosophy, and brought it home to Europe and used it on the Jews. Right? And then he committed these terrible atrocities and the Holocaust. And suddenly people in Europe were like, whoa, this is close to home. And we don't want to take part in this anymore. And that led to the abolition of this formal type of racism. It led to the formation of the UN, League of Nations, you know, all these institutions to say, oh, never again, that this can't happen ever again. And it led to eventually the collapse of empire in terms of formal colonial empire, right? The problem is that what it didn't lead to the end to was the constant imperative to continue to grow capital. So what I mean is that if you take away all the justification around it and all the reason why this racism is happening, then you can say, okay, we've taken away racism. But if you only take away the formal bodies without taking away the initial motivator, which was always to make more money, to grow capital, then what you're left with is that still remains. We have to find other ways to do it. So now for racism proper might have stopped, but we know, especially you guys in America know, how racism has never really ended, right? Like your Black Lives Matter was a great awakening again in terms of your domestic situation over there. We know that colonialism proper might have stopped. And in fact, Israel-Palestine might be the last example really of proper settler colonialism in that way. But neocolonialism hasn't stopped. And we can see today, for example, in the Congo or in Sudan, how the Western world is still benefiting from the natural resources of these countries at the expense of their lives, of their land, right? But the exploitation still continues, but it's not called colonialism. They're not colonies anymore, right? And then the United Nations and League of Nations are set up as part of this justification. So this is our moral veneer that we need to make sure that people don't rise up, that people believe that we are good, that fundamentally we are doing good things. But they have always worked for the continuation of this empirical imperative, right? They've always worked for the continuation of the growth of capital. And so when the United Nations, even when South Africa took Israel to the ICJ, which was a great action, right? Like everybody was really happy that this is happening because Israel's being exposed on a global stage. And this is thanks to the Palestinians and the way they have continually exposed them, right? But ultimately, it will never free Palestine. The UN, the ICJ, because they still rely on the US to actually enforce anything that they come about with. And the US is still beholden to capital interests, to corporate America, to weapons manufacturers, to the billionaires who live there, and to Israel, right? So when we understand this as a system, actually, why aren't the Arab states doing anything? Why isn't the UN doing anything? Why isn't the ICJ and the ICJ doing anything? Because they are all part of the same system that want the same thing. None of it is actually what will liberate us.
One of the criticisms that I hear of Muslim communities is that we like to blame the other people. That our situation is bad because we are victims of all this stuff, right? Now, in what you've said just now, that to the degree that we who have migrated to the West, either we were driven out of Uganda or Somalia or whatever other countries may be, or we pursued greener pastures, economic prosperity from the Indo-Pak continent or whatever, right? Looks like we are part of the system. We are also accumulating capital, and we are not paying attention. Yeah, we may pay a lip service, maybe go to a demonstration here and there, but we're really not engaging in a way that we become advocates for justice, right?
100%. 100%. This is a really key factor. And this is, I think, what the awakening that is happening now is that we are complicit. There is no question about it that I am a capitalist, you are a capitalist, right? Like we live in this system and we operate as normal. And actually, this is exactly what the system needs from us. That's all it needs from us is for us, even, the US government doesn't care that you go on a protest every Saturday. Not really, because as long as on Monday you go to work and you continue making money for the corporation that you work for and it can continue growing capital, it doesn't matter that you went to a protest on Saturday, right? And this is really key to understand, is that the entire system is based around the growth of capital, and everything we do works within that system because it has penetrated us internally, our education systems, our communities now, our mindsets. So we bring up our kids and we educate them in a way that makes them most suited to continue growing capital. We take on career paths, our aspirations. If you sit down today and asked everyone in your community to do a 5-year plan, the main focus around that would be how they're going to make more money, or how they're going to make their company more money, or how they're going to make their business more money, right? Like the hegemony, when I say hegemony, this culture, this constant noise that we have been brainwashed to a large extent to only ever focus on making ourselves and these corporations more money, right? So yes, 100% we are complicit. And I think when we talk about solutions, what we talk about is how we extricate ourselves from this complicity. And us here, me in the UK, you guys in America, we have more of a duty, because we have more of a privilege, we have more of a responsibility than most people in the world to make sure that we are working, that we are on that journey to liberation.
But if you look at the situation of Muslims, certainly in the UK, maybe you guys have been there for much longer than the migrant communities here. I guess the history of Muslims in America goes back to the times of slavery, but they were all kind of deprived of their identities at that time. But in the recent migrants, people are so busy. Look, what is the demographic of Muslims in Seattle? We've got Afghan refugees, we've got Iraqi refugees, we've got Bosnian refugees, right? We've got Vietnamese Cham people refugees, right? We got refugees from all these war-torn countries, and we got economic refugees. And these people are just busy establishing their roots. They can't really, rather than writing a small check here or there to support the flood victims of Pakistan or the earthquake victims of whatever part they may be in Turkey, or maybe sending a check to Gaza to help medical supplies or tent go in there. So that's all I can do. because our engagement with the politicians, doesn't take us anywhere, right? And in fact, someone like me, as a religious person, I can't even engage politically because our status will be compromised, right? But at the same time, it is very depressing to see all these scenes of violence and absolutely carnage, inhumanity, right? I mean, one of the things, I've stopped watching TV because I cannot see any more babies being pulled out of the concrete rubble. It's really a sense of helplessness. So I agree that we may be complicit in the system, right? But how do we break out of it? What are the practical ideas to help us move forward here?
So I think there's some really important points you've raised there. And you mentioned these different communities and these different groups of people, and it's similar situations in the UK. One of the things that's really important to recognize is that our responsibility to the world around us is proportional to the privilege that we embody, right? Like, as Westerners, like living in the West, we already have a level of privilege. We have the security, we have shelter, we have food on our table every day. Like, that's already a level of privilege. But then even within our communities, we know that some people have more time, more disposable income to have, and that increases your sense of responsibility in the world. But really, I guess the first thing, I think, that the first step that we all need to take, and I think one of the most fundamental at the moment, is this idea of critical awareness. And liberation scholars talk about this, Paulo Freire, Franz Fanon, like these are really key concepts that when we first approach these injustices, we need to recognize and help others around us recognize how these are all interconnected and how we are all part of the system of oppression, and simultaneously we are all oppressed as well by the same system. The poverty we see in our domestic settings is the same oppression that we're seeing in Gaza, but it's a different scale. And those who are oppressed by that in the domestic settings still have a responsibility to alleviate the oppression of those in Gaza. Like, these are, what I'm saying is, when we understand the interconnectedness between the Black liberation movement, the climate movement, the movement for a free Palestine, the movement for a free Congo, when we understand that all of these have come about from the same structures and systems of oppression that we are all living under and we are all complicit in, that is a really important step. So I think critical awareness, this consciousness, is a really important first step.
So, I agree with you. I think consciousness. But so, what are the, let's just focus on consciousness, right? Raising awareness. Now, in a community setting, the way we raise awareness in our Islamic communities, right, is through gatherings in Muharram or in Ramadan, right? But when people go to these gatherings, they're all kind of rituals of no relevance, right? We don't talk about issues of the present time. We don't talk about the Hussein and Ali Asghar of the present time. We talk about something that happened 14 centuries ago, right? And it's like an opium, right? That I go in there, I get a dose, and I feel, okay, good. I did my matam, I come home, I did Azhar Hussein, I did everything, I cried, so I feel good. But really, I'm not really paying attention to the issues of today. Imam Hussein's call was Hal min Nasirin Yansurna, right? And there is an Ali Asghar crying for help today, right? So how do we, we can talk about changing other systems, but I want us to focus, how do we change us first?
Yeah, and I think there's a balance there, right? So we've got to remember that part of what the Palestinians are going through right now is this cultural genocide as well, this cultural erasure, right? So the Israelis are coming in, and this has always been part of the colonial project and even for us, like as immigrants to this country, our cultures are being erased as well, right? Now, when we go to mosque, Muharram, Ramadan, and we do these rituals, I understand the frustration around how these rituals might not seemingly be changing anything. I also feel like these rituals have spiritual wisdom that we have to be careful not to lose, right? But at the same time, you are right in that there must be balance. There must be balance in terms of, rather than just becoming about mourning Imam Hussein, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what would Hussein do here? What would he be doing here today? And to me, this is really clear. Like, when we look at the example of the Prophet and Imam Hussein, They were not reformists in a political sense. They were not. They were never, when the Prophet came to Mecca, there was a system in place. There was a political system. They had these idols, they had trade, and it was an oppressive system. And the Prophet never engaged with it. The equivalent, what I'm saying is that the Prophet today, if he was in America or in the UK, he wouldn't have been going to politicians to try and appeal to them to change things. Because when they even said to him, join us, become part of the ruling class. Essentially what they said to the Prophet. And the Prophet said, even if you gave me the sun in one hand and the moon in the other, I would never do it, right? What the Prophet did was revolution. What he said to them was, no, your entire system is predicated on this injustice. We need to upturn it. We need to overthrow it, right? And we need to be of a similar mindset that we are not here asking for Western politicians to liberate us or to free us. We are not here going to them to beg them for freedom, liberation, to free Palestine. What we have to understand is that as a collective, as a community, both as a small domestic community and as a collective in terms of the wider community, the power we have is in our unity, in our ability to come together and do things together, right? And Imam Hussein's majalis, Ramadhan majalis, these community settings that bring people together without trying to make money off each other, but actually come together in a sense of compassion and love and relationship and joy. These are really powerful times to actually build up that solidarity, which is a form of building power, which can be used in the fight against injustice.
No, I agree with you. I think that rituals are very important. My only point was that rituals need to develop relevance to our present times.
Yeah, absolutely.
At times we are just having rituals for the sake of rituals, right? I mean, whether it's in the month of Rajab having kundas, or in the month of Muharram going for Azai Hussein, or in the month of Ramadan. Look, we have a ritual of reading the Quran, right? We recite Quran, but we don't know what we are reciting. I mean, we don't even do the tadabbur of the Quran, right? So those rituals, I agree with you that there are a lot of wisdom and we should not really remove them. But the question is, how do we bring them alive in our lives? That's what's missing. But you see, when you talk about revolution, that's kind of threatening language, right? Let me do another before we go to that point here. Take the case of Muharram, okay? I ask my congregation, saying, would you feel comfortable taking your next door Christian, Jew, atheist neighbor, inviting him to a Muharram majlis? And if you feel comfortable, is great, right? And what is their experience? If you don't feel comfortable, why not? Is it because something we are doing? Is it something because they are so far out? So, because, Baby Zainab, for example, brought the message of Karbala to us, not by being isolated. She went out there and she talked about the atrocities that were done to them, right? And this is how we learned about the great injustice that took place. But yet we are in echo chambers. Nobody else is listening to us other than ourselves. And in fact, when we go there, we actually make things worse because we curse our brothers and sisters from Ahl Sunnah.
I think there's a couple of things to bring out there. There's a really interesting discussion. One is that when you say, would I bring my friend, my neighbor, inevitably we're thinking about white people here. You're not really thinking about.
Well, it could be Hispanic, it could be African American, it could be Chinese, it could be Japanese, it could be anybody.
We have to understand how what we view as normal and abnormal, it plays into this, right? So the reason why we might find it difficult to bring someone to a Matam program or a soft program, right, might be that it's a bit weird. Right? Like, let's call it what it is. Like, if my friend came and saw this, they'd be like, whoa, what are these guys doing? Like, it makes no sense. It's a bit weird, right? But we have to question what defines our normal to us, especially us living in the Western world. Like, this is part of the hegemony, part of the way in which we have been asked to narrow our mindsets to a single cultural point, right? So I just want to put that out there. Like, this is actually part of the system telling us what is normal, what is abnormal, and what is okay to be. And about Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, yes, she did the talking, but we have to remember what came first, what came before that, right? And I have to question that if Imam Hussein alayhi salam was here today, or even if we just cast our minds back to that time, we have to remember that there were people around him telling him to engage as well. Like, he had an opportunity. He could have said, okay, I'll tell you what, I know Yazid is awful and he's terrible and he's promoting injustice. I am going to do bay'ah to Yazid, and then I will try and influence him and talk to him and make him better. Or maybe even he will let me in his court because I will do bay'ah to him, and then I will be able to influence matters like that. He could have said all of that. But what Imam Hussein understood is that there was such a fundamental contradiction there that he had no choice but to say, no, I will not do bay'ah, even though it led to what it was inevitably going to lead to, which was, the devastating Battle of Karbala. Right? So I think we have to be of that mindset now and recognize that, yes, there is a time for talking and there is a time for promoting our culture and showing, and doing what Bibi Zainab did to the rest of the world, right? But there is also a time to recognize that these systems of oppression are fundamentally contradictory to the liberation that our own faith brought about in 7th century Arabia. Right? And now we have to embody that movement for liberation. So when I talk about revolution, I know it sounds radical and I know it sounds fighty, but all I am saying is that if we are beginning to, and I think we're on the same page here, recognize these structures, these systems of oppression, how rooted they are, how long the tentacles of empire are. And the only solution to that is to uproot it. And that's all I mean by revolution, is how do we uproot this from the root so that not just a ceasefire, which would be amazing because it would stop the death and the destruction. How do we make sure we alter the material conditions that require, that promote, that push for genocide to happen in the first place? How do we change that? And that, I think, is the really key question.
I hear you. But let me paint a couple of scenarios for you, right?
Sure.
I have been to Dar es Salaam not too long ago, and it's kind of interesting. After you go back there after a long time, you see these scenes and the commemorations. So, for example, there'll be a banner, "Kullu ardhin Karbala, kullu yawmin Ashura," right? And one thing that was what struck me, because I happened to be in the month of Muharram Safar when I was there a few years ago. And the thing that I saw was from the airport, I was in a traffic jam, and I see this little kid who should be in school, is not in school, but is actually going from car to car to car to car, trying to sell to make a living, right? And yet, I was invited to a nice, good gourmet dinner at the mosque, and I said, like, this doesn't kind of connect, right? So, yes, we can try to change the systems, and we should, on the Gaza and other things going on. But I'm saying that I think there's a lot of introspection that is required from within, because until we fix our things, what is the reason why our community, the Khoja community, did not really fully integrate in Africa, right? They had to, there was an exodus in Zanzibar, there was an exodus in Uganda, there was an exodus in Somalia, right? Because we could not really connect. We were isolated, right?
Yeah.
So I think
so there's a lot there, actually, a really interesting point. So I think, first of all, you are right. Like, there is no movement for liberation without internal reflection, right? Like, in fact, yes, on a community level, but also on an individual level. Like, I have to recognize how these systems have impacted the way I think, the way I raise my family, the way I change my behaviors, and then recognize how it's impacting my community. And then I can look at the wider world, right? Like, and all we will ever be able to impact is ourselves, our families, and our communities. Like, there is no, there's not going to be one hero that comes, and we're never trying to be one hero that comes along and changes the world. This is about collective liberation, right? I mean, in Africa, there's a couple of things I want to say about the whole Africa situation. One is when we see the history of how the British colonized different places, they were very, very smart about this, right? Because they didn't have the population to go about and colonize a population in a way that controlled the people with enough numbers. Even in India, when the British colonized India, they were outnumbered by about 1,000 to 1, right? Like, it was ridiculous numbers. If the Indians wanted, if they rose up, they could have, eaten them, like, that's how big the numbers were. And in Africa, they did a very smart thing, which is they used the Indians as a buffer so that if there was ever any uprising from an African population, the Indians would be the first to take it. And we saw it happen, right? Eventually in Uganda, we saw it happen. So the reason, yes, there was a lack of integration. Yes, we have to take some responsibility for that, and we have to reflect on that. We also have to recognize that it was intentional, right? It was part of the system that the British had put in place to divide up different communities and ensure that there's some levels, some hierarchy there, right? So I know my grandfather, for example, who couldn't read or count, was employed as an accountant by a British company over there, and that the people who were working in the warehouse of the same company were, people with high levels of education, but they were Black Africans, so they were relegated to the warehouse. And even though he had no education, he was put in the office doing accountancy. Like, the way the British operated through their corporations and through the state was always in the sense of divide. And this division is something we're still feeling today, right?
But one of the things we take pride in is our faith, right? And the values and the morality and ethics, right? So, what does it say? That says, British had a better system that was overpowering our strong moral, ethical, faith-based values?
Only if you consider that that military strength and might is what really makes a victor, in which case Yazid did win in Karbala, right? Like, I think this is the mindset, again, that we have been told, is that actually it is completely fine that Israel is taking the land in Palestine because they won it militarily, right? But if we consider actually what are our values, what do we consider to be victorious? What do we want our world to look like? Like, are the victors the people who can come and steal someone else's land or come and colonize another people? Or are the victors those who can truly connect to their land and feed the people of the land and, create communities where compassion and joy and care is flowing? Like, I think it is a mindset shift because we have lived in this system which has had to tell us that they won. They won because they are the most capitalist, that they have been able to exploit most successfully. Then our image of victory becomes that. But no, they never actually won because they lost themselves in the process.
Our time is up. I want to promise my audience that it will not be more than half an hour. This is a long discussion.
Can I take 1 minute?
Yes, I was going to invite you to just have some summarizing comments, and inshallah we can continue this discussion some other time. But please conclude the discussion for us. I think we just started the subject. We've not concluded anything.
It is a big topic, and thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. What I would say is that I don't want to leave this without giving some idea of some semblance of hope and some idea of what we can be doing next. Everybody knows the actions like the boycotts, the protest, all of these are very, very important actions. I would say one of the most important actions we can be doing is building connections, right, between each other in the community and outside our community, in the wider community, with our neighbors, in local community. Because if we can create systems that care for each other without relying on the state, without relying on the capitalist system, even if it's community gardens or mutual aid projects or places we meet up and learn and talk, right? These systems will be our future, essentially. So really important to create that. And I would say that the last thing we want is to fall into despair, because that is exactly what the system wants from us. They will keep bombing because they don't want you to keep up this hope that we can give birth to a new world. But actually, our hope comes from the fact that the entire planet now is rejecting the system we currently live in, both in terms of the people and the natural planet is causing earthquakes and floods to tell us that the time is up for this system. It will end. We just have to make sure we transition to something more just and equitable for everyone, inshallah.
Hasnain, fascinating. I so much enjoyed our conversation. I think we could be talking for days and days, and I think you did a wonderful job tying all these things together, right? I mean, colonialism, values, and also the climate change, how these things are interconnected, right? And how we can, they're challenging us to think anew, to act anew, and to build networks. And I 100% agree with you. That's really the ultimate thing to do, to build bonds with our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues. And that by doing so, we'll develop courage to be able to speak honestly, frankly, and really grow in the process. Thank you very much. Once again,
Thank you so
Mubarak.
much. Ramadan Mubarak to you and to
inshallah,
everyone.
we'll see you again soon, okay?
Inshallah. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم على الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول أشهد أن محمدا رسول
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
علي ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا جد الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن رسول أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير الأمل حي على خير الأمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله إن الصلاة ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته يقوم ويعود بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب رب صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته يقوم ويعود الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده صل على محمد وآل محمد يا ولي العافية نسألك العافية عافية الدنيا والآخرة الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. استغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم. أنت رب العليم الذي ليس كمثله شيء
وهو السميع البصير. وهذا الشهر
شرفته وقدرته على الشهور
وهو الشهر الذي فرست السماء
وهو الشهر المضى الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات والفرقان وجعلت فيه الليل جعلتها قلنا بالطاقة إلى إيمان أنت من العالمين خيرك لنا برحمتك يا رب.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير الأمل حي على خير الأمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا في الدنيا والآخرة. على كل شيء قدير. صل على محمد وآل محمد. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأعوذ. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأعوذ. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآله. يا ولي العافية نسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم أغني كل فقير. اللهم أشفي كل جائع. اللهم اكسر كل عريان. اللهم اقض دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل أسير. اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم سد فقرنا بقنار. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اغفر عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر إنك على كل شيء قدير. الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 Request for Surah Al-Fatiha for the Marumeen of those who sponsored the iftar tonight and all those who support our Ramadan programs and all the Marumeens and our friends and family circles. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah.
الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام على الأئمة الطاهرين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا صاحب الأسر والزمان سيدي الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليك يا إماما وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله لك ما وعدك من النصر وظهور الأمر ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله الرحمن الرحيم. وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى أهله في هذه الساعة وفي كل أسرة وليا وحافظا وقائدا ودليلا ومعينا حتى تسكنه وتمتعه فيها.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow. Salat al-Dhuhr is 1:15 in the afternoon, 1:15. And tomorrow evening program, 6 o'clock.